Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Explorers Club. How many of you are here for the first time? Awesome, awesome. Well, by the way, I'm Richard Garriott. I'm the current president of the Explorers Club, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate you making it out through the storms to be here this evening. That was a challenge, by the way, not just the storms to get here, but a lot of us, like I flew in yesterday. You were supposed to be here 72 hours or so ago and only made it today. Who else came from out of town, out of the downtown city? So you managed to make it in. Thank you for all of you. Thank you for all of you who are here for the first time. Okay, thank you. What are you saying there? Hawaii? Yeah. Wow, that is a journey. That is a journey. I heard what? Yeah, exactly. Hawaii. Yes, very good. By the way, this is the inaugural Monday night lecture of our upcoming season. We couldn't be happier to have what you're about to hear tonight on display for you, on the deck for you. You are not going to be disappointed with what you're going to hear about tonight. I had an incredibly unusual pleasure to get a preview of this some months ago before Lee had the opportunity to publish it. And it was jaw-dropping then, just like it is jaw-dropping now. The work they have done and the discoveries they've made are truly changing the history of our history in profound ways that I think cannot be underestimated, the importance of this find. By the way, for those of you who don't know about the club, this club has been around for about 120, little more than 120 years now. Pretty much, I would argue, any explorer worth their salt over the last 120 years has been a member of this club, going back to before, the early members, the people that pushed the final dragons, off the maps of the Earth. And while a lot of the early explorers who were planting their nation's flags in places like the North Pole and the South Pole and the top of mountains, while a lot of them took their country's flags along with them, they were all also members of the Explorers Club. And so if you haven't looked at that plaque in the front entrance, with the display cases that are shockingly empty because we're in the middle of a big renovation of our first floor, but our members were the first to the North Pole, the first to the South Pole, the first to the top of Everest, the first to the bottom of the deepest point in the ocean, the Mariana Trench, and the first to the surface of the moon. Almost all astronauts still are members of this club. And so, is that Mark? Who is that? Holt. Okay, thank you, Holt. Appreciate it. And but apologies again for the renovation. Please come back again if this is your first time. When the lower floors are open, I know you'll enjoy the incredible museum of this place that includes things like, that is the sledge hanging over the door. There was the sledge that first made it to the North Pole, and if you look at it, how it's held together, it's tied together with walrus hide, so it's flexible and doesn't rattle itself apart on the ice heaves. Just behind this, you can only see a little corner of it here behind the screen is the Apollo 13 lunar flag of the Explorers Club with an apology letter from James Lovell, who did not manage to take it to the surface of the moon, and he was very tragically sad about that and returned it to us with an apology letter of all things. The four-tusked elephant, there's only been 3 in history that we know of, and that's the only one that still, the physical aspect of it exists. Anyway, come back. It's an amazing, amazing place. If you haven't had time to prowl it, please do. But tonight, you're going to hear just an amazing tale would be the wrong way to say it, an amazing set of stories about some amazing discoveries by an amazing team of explorers led by Lee Berger. He is not only an acclaimed member of our organization, the Explorers Club, but also he's a National Geographic Explorer in residence. He is a director of the Carnegie Science Center, as I understand, and he has already found not just 1 but 2 hominin species. I'm pretty excited when I find a fossilized shell out in the road cut behind my house, but I understand I just heard from him that there's more that we'll hear of tonight than I got the preview of some months ago. So you're going to hear some more amazing things. And as we walked in, I think there was only 2 books left in the box. But I'm told that that since the books are likely now sold out or will be soon sold out, do not fret. They have book plates here that if you buy the book, he'll still sign you the book plate. They'll put those in additional copies of the books that we'll go acquire, and you can come pick up your book at a later date. So, so even though they're sold out, fear not, you can still get one. But without further ado, Lee, please come share with us your stories.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's a spectacular pleasure to be here tonight. Thanks to the members of the club for inviting me back to the Explorers Club. Extraordinary organization. If you're not a member, join. Thanks, Anne, for all the organizational hard work that got me here on this 8-week trip and back there. And I also want to remember, I mean, I can't be in this city without remembering September 11th and what happened today, and remembering those that lost their lives there as we go on to the sort of story of us and then the story not of us. I'm going to take you on a journey that's been very close to me. It's been my life story over the past almost 34 years that I've lived in Africa. Dominantly, my work has been in South Africa, although I've worked all over the world. I began there as a young man. I grew up in rural Georgia, ended up in Africa. That's a whole nother lecture and a whole nother story about how I got there. There's me eating termites with the great National Geographic photographer Ken Garrett back in 1993 for one of the first stories I ever did with National Geographic magazine on the origins of humans as a young PhD student, actually, at that time. And then I had my first big discovery in South Africa, 2 hominid teeth at the site of Gladysville in 1992. 2 hominid teeth, and I know that sounds like nothing, but they were so scarce. It was a time when there were actually more paleoanthropologists, people who studied these fossils, than there were fossils that we studied. And those 2 teeth actually made National Geographic magazine, started that decades-long relationship with that organization as well. I thought it had happened for me. You know, that moment I'd made my discovery, the next trowel or the next swipe of a brush was going to reveal that half of a hominid mandible, and I would be able to dine out at conferences for the rest of my life on this half of a mandible. It didn't happen for 17 years. 17 years of believing in exploration, of working across the continent, until in 2008, August of 2008, exactly August 15th of 2008, just a month ago is the anniversary, my then 9-year-old son, while going to a site I discovered with Google Earth, taking him out there to look what it had, said, "Dad, I found a fossil." And indeed he had, which turned out to be a new species of hominin, skeletons of them. The first 2 skeletons of early hominids ever found in Africa. We would name a new species, Australopithecus sediba, 1.977 million years old. And man, I was living the dream. You know, here I had suddenly gone from 17 years of nothing, of people saying, you know, I've never seen anyone go so far on 2 teeth, to the discovery of this. I practiced things like open access that I'd wanted to experiment with, the free sharing of data, assembling early career scientists to work on this, and really trying to work at transforming not only the way we looked at early hominids, but the way in which the science itself was done, the way we examined. And that was a passion of mine. And I threw myself into it and was absolutely living that dream. We had 3 special editions of the journal Science with the sediba on the cover of each of the editions. You know, the reason I say that is for scientists like us, that's like having a rock star being on the cover of a Rolling Stone magazine, you know, when your fossil's on the cover. And I'd quit exploring because I'd won that lottery. And, you know, because you're not going to find more of this. And it was 5 years as we started building a structure over the site that I decided to go back into the field. And I decided to use a map that I created to discover this and begin exploring. And that would lead me to eventually enlist these 2 very skinny, young, amateur cavers named Rick Hunter and Steve Tucker in their prison orange. I don't know why they choose those colors. It's really, and they would go using a map I'd created back in 2008 and 2013 down into a series of caves, and they called me eventually after journeying into a cave called the Rising Star Cave, one of the best known caves in the entire sub-equatorial Africa. Everyone's been in it. It's about 4 kilometers of underground areas. I'd been in it in the 90s, but they were dutifully going through all the maps and everything. And on one night on September 13th, which is coming up, interestingly, that anniversary, they climbed up a thing called Dragon's Back, which you'll hear a lot about tonight, into the top of it. And Steve here decided he wanted a selfie, this selfie. And so he backed up into this crevasse. Rick took the picture, and he realized it went. It went down. And so down they went into this horrifically skinny space that's averaging probably about 10 and a half inches its entire length. It squeezes down to about 7.5 inches in places, and it goes for almost about 50 feet down vertically and laterally into a system where they dropped into a cave and took these pictures. They brought them to me a couple of nights later and showed them to me, and ignore that this is for home sewing aid only. I immediately realized that I was looking at something no paleoanthropologist had ever seen. In this deep chamber, impossible to get to as they described it, was this material. I immediately knew it was an ancient hominid. Any paleoanthropologist would, by the proportions of those molars. You can see the third molar is larger than the second, larger than the first. It's got these sort of very robust premolars, these molarized premolars. But the problem was it didn't look like in the condition of any ancient hominid. It literally was lying on the floor. No one had ever seen anything like that. But I had no idea how I was actually going to get at these things. And so after sending my son in to make sure they were real, because I was trying for Father of the Year, I did not tell my wife before I did that. I put a Facebook ad out looking for skinny scientists. You don't have to read that. It just says, I need skinny scientists that, I'm not going to tell you what you can do. You're going to come for a month. I'm not going to pay you. I may risk your life. You have to work in cramped quarters. You have to have a PhD or a very well-trained master's student in excavation in order to work in this extraordinary environment. And I assembled a team, found the 6 best scientists in the world to do that with 56 qualified applicants, and they just happened to be women. And we launched what would be called the Rising Star Expedition, literally within a month and a half of that first discovery actually happened. A global expedition with rescue teams. I had to design ways of working in an environment no paleoanthropologist had, all to recover that one skeleton that I'd seen in those images. You'll see some of the images here from that extraordinary time. And it was very soon into this sort of adventure that we began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. On day 2, we realized it wasn't a skeleton. It was 2 skeletons. By the end of the first week, we had the largest hominin assemblage ever discovered in sub-equatorial Africa, over 480 individual specimens. 1 week. By the end of the expedition, we had recovered the largest assemblage of ancient human relatives discovered in all of history. And I think you'll see from some of these images taken at the time, these were the kind of things that would give me, you can get where I nicknamed them the underground astronauts, much to my chagrin. And you can see the excitement as people began to realize that we were in one of those extraordinary historical moments of discovery that I hope everyone gets to live through at least once in your life, where you understand that your world is truly changing because they were coming out, they were strange, and they were abundant. I'll give you an idea of the conditions we work in this system, the Rising Star Cave system. This is the Superman's Crawl, which some of you may have heard of. This was before we widened it a little bit. Everyone had to traverse this, and this is how you would pass through it. Each explorer, each adventurer, every scientist passed through this multiple times a day. This is not hard. It gets hard. After passing through this, you enter the beautiful Dragon's Back chamber, which was our staging area. You would then climb the Dragon's Back itself, named because of the sharp rocks. It's actually a collapsed feature that fell from the roof about 180 to 280,000 years ago. And it actually, at the top of that, you have to go down that slot that I showed you, that Steve was in. And if you want a little taste of what it's like in that, this is what getting out of that is like at the bottom as you exit that. You've just descended 50 feet. You've gone through, and this is not the tight part. And as soon as you do this, you drop down into this space, and you understand that you have to get back out. It is not your typical cave. It's a labyrinth-like cave. It's a network cave of linear structures, a lattice-work cave held up by small bands of chert that you pass through. This is starting over at the top of the chute itself, leading back through this large area, Dragon's Back. You descend this great area till you're 130 meters underground, moving up to the top where our command center is, at the very top, here next to this beautiful wild olive tree. That's just one aspect of the cave system that we work in. And the fossils were extraordinary. Coming from both the surface and then in an area we excavated of about 1 meter by 80 centimeters, we were covering these spectacular fossils. These were these skulls you can see here, which on the right and left with their very odd, tiny brains and sort of slightly prognathic faces, flattened in some ways with an enlarged supraorbital torus or a brow ridge. The fossils we were finding were unprecedented in paleoanthropology. They were complete. They were beautiful. Things like almost everything you're seeing, we had never seen in the field of paleoanthropology, a field of fragments and scraps, fossils like this. In fact, up until, well, at least Sediba came along, about 80% of the entire world's fossil record of ancient humans and their relatives was comprised of isolated teeth. That's how rare they were. And we began to see skeletons. The situation was astounding. And we again were living this sort of scientific dream as I brought together even earlier career scientists to join the study of these, and we began producing a series of manuscripts. We would describe this species and name it a new species, placing it rather reluctantly in our own genus, the genus Homo, and calling it naledi, or star, after the rising star cave system. And it was a strange beast we were looking at. It had a tiny brain. Here you see it superimposed on a human brain, about a third the size of ours, and slightly larger, but within the range of some chimpanzees and gorillas. It had the prognathic face I described, and many primitive features that we would recognize in hominids that are, say, 1.5 to 2.5 million years old, like Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and others, but had tiny human-like teeth as well. The body was equally as strange. While it walked on 2 legs, bipedal, like us, it had these very strange shoulders, almost ape-like shoulders, in fact, gibbon-like shoulders, clearly adapted for some type of climbing. But as you moved down these long arms, it would become more and more human-like until it came out with these beautiful human-like hands, but with unique thumbs, almost superhuman-like thumbs and curved, highly curved fingers. Its spine was like that of a tiny Neanderthal. Its pelvis, like a primitive hominid that should be 3 or 4 million years ago, flattened and flared. And again, the top of the femur expressing that, but then these long, skinny legs down to an incredibly human-like foot. They were tall. They weren't small. They were averaging about 4'8" to 5'2", 5'3". Now that may not sound very tall to you, but there are plenty of humans in that size range. And when you're sitting with a head atop of that is only the size of a chimpanzee, it's almost a pinhead-like morphology, if you will, when you look at them. We didn't have a date at first. And then we got a date. When we first told the world about this, they told us this thing is 2 to 2.5 million years old. That's what everyone knew it was going to be. When we eventually dated it, though, shockingly, it fell within 230 to 330,000 years. Now, and for that being incredibly surprising because of that tiny brain, we would have thought it would be back there. Fortunately, a few years before, a hominid had been found on the island of Flores that had kind of broken the ice for the potential that there were small-brained hominids. But even at that point, when we announced this in 2015, that specimen was still controversial. Some thought it was just a sort of microcephalic dwarf or some kind of island adaptation. But we were not on an island. We were in Africa. And the problem was that that date violated something in Africa. It violated the idea that only large-brained Homo sapiens existed in Africa. This was traumatic to the field. This didn't sit well with many colleagues because we had told a narrative of the superiority of a large brain, how a large-brained hominids had emerged sometime just after 1 million years, and that was the end of the story. Until we would begin to see around 300 to 250,000 years, the emergence of a complex toolkit, the emergence of what we call the Middle Stone Age, which would lead to, at later times, 120,000 to 80,000 years, the emergence of things like scratches and what we interpret as artwork on ochre, the production of the infinite toolkit. Anything can be a tool effectively, and what were signs of self-adornment, i.e. the rise and origins of modernity. Our field had even invented a term of the origins of modern human studies, and we dropped naledi right into that like a grenade. And that didn't go over really well, particularly when we told the world that our only explanation for a cave being found like this in a deep chamber, far from an entrance, inaccessible since its origins, that only had Homo naledi in it, that our only explanation that we could come up with for that was that this was a site of ritual disposal of the dead. That went over like a lead balloon, because that's a human thing. Paleontology, paleoanthropology has been stripping away all of our great human characters, since we first found out there were human ancestors, all the way to Jane Goodall writing Louis Leakey and saying, I have seen chimpanzees using tools, and he said we are going to redefine what it means to be human, to the collapse of human exceptionalism in the sense that we suddenly realized that there was a bush or tree, but we still taught our evolution like a ladder. And then we drop this small-brained hominin, and we take away one of the truly precious things, one of the last things remaining that would define humans. That and the universal use of mind-altering substances and behaviors, and a few other things, but mortuary practices. But we never said burial. Burial would be a step too far. Burial was the sacred thing about humans. That almost itself defines modernity because of the things that in your mind right now you're probably leading to that it probably implies. Then we started finding other anomalies in places like this. This is a place that's hard to get to. This is another 120 feet beyond the naledi chamber where all those bones were found in these deep, dark crevices in the back. Look at how narrow those spaces are that the people are in back there. And there on a little tiny shelf was a single head, just a face, just sitting on a shelf of lime as if it had been placed there. No body, of a child about 2.5 to 3.5 years old. Why was it there? How did it get there? It clearly didn't walk there, And there were no signs of damage on it that said it might have been, killed by a carnivore and taken there. Just the face. And we began to wonder, are we seeing some sort of other mortuary practice in this space? And then, in 2018, during the course of an expedition, as I was sitting in the command center with Dr. Kanelwe Moliopane sitting next to me, watching excavators work over their shoulder using a camera, a security camera, suddenly I saw what you're about to see. This extraordinary image. They had been excavating an area square adjacent to where we had found those original fossils. They'd hit sterile soil, and then as the camera flicked to an infrared black and white image, I saw this outline and realized that it was a feature, an oval feature with bones in it. Let me interpret those bones for you. You can see the edge of this feature. And what's interesting about it is you have parts of the body here, you have parts of the cranial and head up here and the feet down here. And it's interesting that this pit area extends out beyond those bones. So the bones, it's as if the body of an individual is lying in there and was covered with dirt from there, and that's what it is. We had found a hole dug into the floor of the cave. A body had been placed in it in roughly a fetal position and covered with the dirt that had come from that hole. Some people might call that a grave. In the middle of a deep chamber with a non-human species in it. That was something. Then we found another one. In the hill antechamber, which is that point where you saw Rick dropping into that narrow area, that's where we land before running down a passage, we actually found in the slope, as we were looking below that hole, because I thought, hey, if there's a hole, if we're going to find tools or things, they probably would drop them right there. We didn't find tools. We found a feature. Let me give you a closer look at that. It was again, an oval feature. This white was fragmentary and fragile bones, and so we decided to take it out in its entirety in a plaster jacket that had to be no more than 7.5 inches wide and 50 centimeters long, and you can imagine how difficult that was to get out, and so that we could take it to my wife Jackie's X-ray machine. She's a radiologist with a PhD in paleoanthropology, so we'd have something to talk about at dinner. And he scanned it and saw this remarkable image inside. Inside was a skeleton, an articulated skeleton. This is a foot for some interpretation. These are limb bones, lower limb bones, upper limb bones. That's a face, that's a hand, that's a hand. In roughly, again, a fetal position. And we could see, and here's that plaster jacket material in, you could see a baseline running along the base of it. Again, it's a hole, and it was dug horizontally into a slope. So again, we were looking at what looked like a body in a hole in the ground that had been buried by dirt around it. But we would work more on that. It looked something, and so let me just step back for a moment and talk to you about how we know this isn't some kind of natural thing. See, if a body dies in a depression like this, then it lies flat in the base of that depression when it collapses and deteriorates. It then has to be covered by something, say flowing dirt or things like that, and you get a very clear signal of a geological structure, a strata like that. That's what it's going to look like. That's not what we're seeing in these. These occupy horizontal or deep space. This is what it would look like if, if you had a flow of material in, like by water. If water had drug it in, you would get pellets and pebbles and rocks and things like that, and the body would be covered. So you could get something similar, but you would see if water flow, and there'd be a disruption of material both over areas around it and covering it like that. That's not what we see. Or you would get something like that if it were covered by water. That's not what we're seeing. This is getting more akin to what we're seeing. Here we have an orange layer that's a sedimentary layer 5 centimeters below the surface that's disrupted. And pieces of this orange layer are filtered and put all around the body. Those are broken apart because they were dug out of this hole. The body was put in the hole, and then the dirt containing that layer was put back in it. That is a grave. And this is that child that I was telling you about. It would turn out that it's not one child. There's one main child. I point out the head, body. There's also 2 faces, just like that little face I showed you. Just the upper part of the dentition and faces, sitting right down here on the edge of it. And then what I can't show you right now, but we've discovered using synchrotron energy, the most powerful X-ray in the world, we've discovered a fetus right here. There's a whole fetus body here, all in this little hole dug into a slope, a horizontal hole in the slope with a body in it. Do you see? It's hard to guess what that is because it says rock, right? They always come labeled like that. You see that? This is the hand of that child. It's about 13 years old. Those are its fingers. That is a rock, the only rock in there, the only rock in the entire cave that looks like that. It looks like this. It is a tool-shaped rock in the hand of a non-human species child in a grave. This is a flake scar. These lines that you see on the outside are actually do not penetrate the rock, so they are actually some sort of wear surface. There appears to be some serration around the edge of this. It looks like a very old tool-shaped rock. No human has ever touched that. It still sits inside of that rock, and we're attempting to excavate it using this technology to look at it. You see the thing on the right? That is from a cave called Blombos, 78,000 years old. Has been attributed to the oldest art ever made by a Homo sapiens. Blombos Cave, South Africa. Do you see the cross-hatchings on it in ochre? But do you see the remarkable similarity in shape to those, the tool-shaped rock in the hand of a Homo naledi, and this? And so, one interpretation is that that tool-shaped rock was placed there in that child's hand prior to burial. And as one of my colleagues, Augustine Fuentes, said, postulated, why would you give a dead child a tool or an artifact if you didn't think they were going to use it?
In the Skype interviews, I wanted to see these people face to face, but I also wanted to test some things. I needed to know that if I shut the cameras off, which I did for many of them, I wanted to hear if they could respond to me, because I had already designed by then this system of communication. I knew I was never going to, I will never set foot in that chamber.
I said that in 2013, and during the Rising Star expedition. And here I was sitting ready to describe what was probably going to be the most remarkable and important discovery of my career. My colleagues and I appear to have discovered a burial chamber by a non-human species. They went back again and again and dug holes and put their dead in them. But there were problems. There were difficulties in some of the geological descriptions. Some of our geologists, the 3 who had ever made it into the chamber, and only 46 humans had ever made it at that time, said that there was some fluvial movement of bones, but they could not provide us any sedimentological evidence of water action in the cave. There were some other issues around the idea that could bones have moved from the front of a cave to the back of the cave, because we'd drawn these maps that showed that as a possibility, our geologists had. But we were limited by the human experience in this. Because no matter how much you digitize a space, no matter how much you see a space through a digital medium or even three-dimensional, being there is who we rely on the telling of what is actually there. And so, last year, I decided that before we would publish this, I needed to get in there and see if I could solve these anomalies. I trained as a geologist. And so I lost 55 pounds over a period of 6 months. And in July of last year, I made the attempt. And it was the worst thing I have ever done in my entire life. I had to make decisions along the way, pushing past knowing I might not be able to get back out. Several times I had to make that decision, but eventually, as you see, I got in and immediately began to make discoveries. All of my explorers had been mission-focused. They were in a dangerous environment. They were doing one thing, but they had missed some things were right in front of us. I want you to pay attention to this wall. You see this pillar? This is the passageway to the naledi chamber. It exists about 25 feet beyond that. Here is a pillar. And as I was narrating this journey, I decided I wasn't going to take pictures. I would simply tell the story into my recorder. I first stopped and looked at that and said, this looks remarkably like a door. And then I paused. I'll let myself tell.
Ladder-like structures that are all over the left-hand entrance that are pictographs. Now, someone carved those.
The entire edge of that doorway had been pounded smooth, and it was covered in engravings. No humans had ever been in, other than now 47 humans, and we knew everyone that had been in that space. I want to draw your attention. I'll be taking you into some of these other areas, these X's and these triangles, but draw your attention to this. That's not photoshopped or manipulated. There's something on it. Something has been applied to it. Here you can see an anomalous non-geometric figure. These are natural cracks, by the way. These right here, this has been added. That is obviously not natural. Lateral lines, you see the crosses here. And something has been applied over the surface of this that doesn't look like it's native to the cave. Some of them fluoresce slightly, as if they were carved and then perhaps limestone was placed into them, this box-like structure that you see here. And then there are these things. When I saw those, you see the triangles, the squares, these lateral lines that move up, the ladder-like structures here. There you can see an X that's here. I recognize these, and you will too. That is the oldest art ever done by a Homo sapiens from Blombos Cave. Do you recognize the area here? Even sloping upward with the triangles, the X's. 78,000 years old. Likely 250,000 years old. Done by a large brain Homo sapien, done by a non-human with a brain the size of a chimpanzee. Right above a grave.
So this is pretty incredible, and this is, I'm not releasing this right now, but I want to show this because I can't believe what we're seeing, and we're seeing scratch marks, sort of what you call petroglyphs, which are in pictures or carvings carved into rock. But look at the scale of these things.
And then we found the hashtag. Those are not natural lines. Let me explain. Do you see these wavy lines here? That is an algal stromatolite. It is 2.8 billion year old fossil. These are carved through that and over it. This rock is 4.7 on Mohs hardness scale. It's half, getting close to half the hardness of a diamond. This is not done easily. It's also not done once. This image that you see is only the latest one. Do you see the older ones underneath? There have been dirt applied from the cave floor onto this, and then new carvings over the top of it. I'll just take you on a journey of them. This is how it looks in real life. This is with a polarizing filter, showing you the etchings into it. There are pounded areas, pounded in circular areas, pounded hundreds, if not thousands of times in one space. You can see the depth of these carvings into this very hard rock. Done over and over. Here you can see that area in a polarized way, and over again. Deep carvings, you can even see which order they're done in. This one, that crosses, this, that crosses. You can see the order in which these were carved by a non-human hand. Here's a good look at the depth of them. This was not done easily, lightly, or fast. This would be hard to do with steel implements. Crosses, upside down crosses, hashes, pounded areas. And these funny lines, which for anyone here who's ever studied sort of geometric shapes of Europe and discovery, you'll see many of these sort of five line scratches like this. You can see the dirt from the cave floor that's been applied to older areas, and then the newer scratches that go through them. Those are a very modest look at these, of all the lines on there. You can see the equal signs that are here. We see these as familiar often. You know these figures. We use them in mathematics. We use them in music. They form many of the geometric figures of the earliest human art and human meaning-making symbols. But they're not done by a human. They're done by a non-human biped with a brain slightly larger than a chimpanzee. This one image that you probably keep seeing is this. It's the last image that was done. Why do I do it like that in blue? Because when I saw those first images in this one, I had a transcendent moment. As I switched from the headlamp to a UV light, which I always carry because many things in caves actually fluoresce, the shapes actually lifted and floated off of the rock in front of me. Now, I'm kind of embarrassed talking about that, but I know scientifically why it happens. I'm in an enhanced state. I'm exhausted. I have near-death experience. I know I may not get out of there. And I switched light dramatically, and I had what's called an optical light shift, which is the same phenomena as you're driving home tonight. Look in your rearview mirror at a car behind you, and you'll see the lights actually shift away. You'll see the headlights clearly, and you'll see the light shift away. It's the way light processes into our eye. But for me, it was actually more similar to those things like, you ever seen like Queen's Gambit or A Beautiful Mind where they float? It stunned me so much I had to turn the light off. And, it's not like me. I want you to look at that figure, and then I want you to look at it on the left. I was shown that image that evening after recounting and showing John Hawkes and Augustine Fuentes mine, and immediately both of them pulled their cell phones out, pulled up a picture, and showed me this. And my first thoughts were they had photoshopped my picture. Except this was done in Gorham by, is that my music? Oh, this was done, it's a great music for the background. Actually, you can keep it going. This was done by a Neanderthal in Gorham's Cave 60,000 years ago. That is done by Homo naledi. And they never met each other. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? Do you want to see what they look like in firelight? I can do, I think. What I want you to notice as you look at that is that only the carved lines actually move. Do you see that? The natural rock doesn't. Wherever they've carved, it animates in firelight. But you go, how do you know they had fire? Because as I was sitting in that chamber, contemplating the climb out, I looked up above those burials. We had been looking for fire for a decade, telling how hard it would be to see. And what I saw were these darkened gray areas underneath this bright white flowstone that looked like this. There was ash on the roof. Our explorers had been so focused on what was on the ground that they never looked up to see evidence of soot and ash all over the surface of that chamber. Homo naledi had brought fire in there.
Yeah.
And then I got out, because I'm here, as evidence of that. And that was a horrible, horrible thing. You'll hear all about that in the book, because I almost died and had to make a very difficult decision about injuring myself to actually get out. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. I will not be going back there. I assure you of that. But I'll tell you a beautiful, remarkable story about discovery. At the moment I was looking up, my mentee, Dr. Moliopane, was leading a team in the Dragon's Back, where we had staged for 9 years, just getting ready, because we suddenly had this epiphany, shouldn't we maybe dig this floor? Because maybe it's a lot easier to get to. And what if there are burials under this? And at that same moment, her team, literally, as I was in the naledi chamber, discovered a hearth. It was right under our feet the entire time. They were burning and cooking bones. This is a tiny hearth. This is a great big one in that chamber. And suddenly fire was everywhere. We suddenly went throughout the other cave. This was the next day when I went into the Rising Star chamber, because suddenly I realized we'd been missing things. The Rising Star chamber itself is about 200 meters away and near where the Neoskeleton, that beautiful skull and skeleton I showed you, was found. This sucks. But it's not a patch on what we have. And it was worth going to, because there we'd been walking right over gigantic hearths. Look at the bones, and yes, those little black things, you do not need a PhD in paleoanthropology. That's 250 meters back in the system. Humans don't do that. Right next to a burial chamber. All the burial chambers have Homo naledi bones in them. The chambers adjacent to them, bones of animals and other things that they're burning. It'd been right in front of us. And I had talked my team out of seeing it, because fire is hard to see at 250,000 years. Actually, it's not. We would find that every passage leading in and out of this system, every time two crossed and there was a place you could get lost, there's a hearth there. They were tending and monitoring fires along the routes. They were moving into these difficult spaces, lighting the way. They were even building hearths. That was right in front of us. Look at that. These stacked rocks, and you want to know what's interesting? We don't think these rocks come from inside the cave. They were carrying those hundreds of meters back in there for some reason. And so, we have a small-brained hominin in southern Africa, living contemporary to humans, large-brained humans, that is utilizing deep spaces of caves in a way humans don't, burying dead, its loved ones, using fire to cook, and using fire to light, and carving meaning-making symbols on the walls above where it puts its dead. 230 to 330,000 years ago. That's at least 100 to 150,000 years ago before humans, large-brained humans, will do anything like that we've discovered so far. What does that all mean? I don't know. But I think we're at a profound moment in human history. I think discoveries like this have told us that we must view our past in a different way. We have told a story for thousands of years about human exceptionalism, trying to create a narrative of why we are different and special, why we invented this stuff, these behaviors. But we probably didn't. We're not that special. We, of course, now know that cetaceans, elephants, corvids, and of course chimpanzees and gorillas have cultures. Why did we write off these things that are logarithmically closer to us in physiology, anatomy, and almost certainly behavior from having culture? It's probably because we wanted to be different. But we are likely looking at the next age of discovery. The next stage of exploration as we begin to look beyond the bones, to see the rituals of the past, to see the cultures of the past. This stuff used to be thought to be impossible to see. Now, we have windows into it. I know it is just one species. I know it is just one site. But I can tell you, as someone who's spent my life exploring, that when you have a breakthrough like this, when you have the discovery of the etchings on the walls and the burials in the ground, and other scientists begin to look at their evidence differently, that we begin to see things with different eyes. The lesson I'd like to leave you with tonight is one that has profoundly moved me. And that is the simple 3 words: never stop exploring. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Richard did give me his apologies. He had to leave early, and so he left me to be the master of questions. We'll take 10 minutes or so, or a little longer, to ask any questions. We have a microphone that can float, and I'd ask you to wait till let's go right in the back. I saw an eager hand up in the middle. You.
Wait for the microphone, please.
Yep, wait for the microphone. It'll be on the way, just so people can hear you.
Lee, that was fantastic. You said the only tool, and certainly even the only stone back in those depths, was in the hand of this young child. So I'm wondering if there any evidence of how they made those carvings. Where are the tools that they used for that? Because that is, as you said, rough stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that the tool-shaped rock, that I'm very careful to call it, is likely made of chert, and chert is banded within this, but it's harder than the dolomite. And so if you were going to carve that stuff, a pointed rock with a sharp edge would probably be the kind of thing you might have to carve those. And so, that is not an improbable type of tool. It is interesting that we're not finding lots of tools. And I think an important thing to point out about that is that's not the way humans deal with spaces like that. I mean, many of you are in this field, or you've certainly been to archaeological sites. You've seen a hearth. When you see a human hearth, it looks like a litter box of rock and debris and debitage that scatters around. Humans are messy and wasteful when it comes to tools. Naledi isn't doing that. And that may be because they may be curating their tools. They may find their tools very precious, or we may find they're caching them, and we have just not found those places where they're caching them. If they're curating those tools, that's really remarkable, because humans haven't been really good curators of tools except sort of in the last several thousands of years. We tend to be wasteful when it comes to stone tools. So that's just another of the great mysteries. This space is not being used in the way a human uses deep cave. Humans don't use deep cave spaces, by the way. I know you hear caveman and all that. The vast majority of human history interaction with caves with the twilight zone, rock shelters in the immediate areas back. Yes, there are some incidences of deeper penetration, but prehistoric humans don't really go like this. This is a different use of that space. Here. You? Wait for the mic there, if you will. It helps everyone hear.
Thank you. This is fascinating. I was wondering if any of your colleagues, or really you, have reconsidered other evidence, other paleoanthropological evidence in light of this discovery, and sort of what some of the conclusions that, or possibilities, have opened up that you found.
A couple of colleagues who happen to be in this room right here and I were having this discussion just before this talk. I think that, I said this during the talk, and I do believe this. I think that one of the problems we've had in the field of paleoanthropology is that we have approached it since the sort of late 1960s into the 70s as the null hypothesis when we examine a hominin situation, as that the way it got there must be natural. That's the null hypothesis, that it's natural. We did that as a rejection of earlier work by people like Raymond Dart, who came up with the osteodontocratic culture. It inspired Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, African Genesis, those type of things. And it was a rejection of that as, sort of embracing too much woohoo cultural anthropology and kind of thing. And I think that we moved to the other extreme. We started doing excavations like paleontologists, like people digging dinosaurs. And I suspect we missed a lot of things. And I suspect that the one great contribution that's going to come out of this discovery is it's going to force all paleoanthropologists to approach this at the null hypothesis as cultural, to treat it like a forensic site, so that we gather these kind of informations, because this type of information is ephemeral and superficial. It is not easy to see. It's not the kind of evidence that is readily available. It has to be taken with great care and found. And it's why it took us so long to recognize burials. It's why our scientists, scientists are human too. It's why they walk right by those carvings and not see them and walk by evidence of fire. I did it as well. So it's not and so I think that usually discoveries like this, what they do is they sort of take a little bit to get hold of, and then they dramatically shift the field so that we never make those mistakes again. Right here in the front, and then I'll move back to that side. Yes? Yeah.
So in your book, you're suggesting that human
don't give any spoilers away.
Well, yeah,
yeah, no, you can't.
I mean, we may have gathered some technical understanding of fire from this group that you've discovered, and you're also suggesting that there could be common genetic material. We could have our genetic material in us currently that might show some sort of common interbreeding. Possibly, it's possible. But I'm confused about that a little bit. Does that mean that there was interbreeding, or does that mean that humans as they exist today may have had a common ancestor with these lovely people in this rising star cave system? As you know, the Neanderthals, as far as I was really confused about this, because I wasn't sure if it was definitive that we think that we interbreeded with some Neanderthal people in the Northern Europe area, or if we just have a common ancestor with breeding, and therefore we share little segments of genetic code with our Neanderthal cousins.
Right. So let me take your first bit about fire. One of the things that I was trying to point out in the book is that part of our sort of belief in the power of fire is this human exceptionalism idea. Fire's been around for millions of years, and I do not know why so many colleagues struggled with Homo naledi not having fire before we discovered fire, because they would have had to have lost the ability to do fire. So what I was trying to point out there was that humans didn't invent fire. And that, it's like almost everything. We keep thinking we do these things, and then something else has done it before. That's really the point. The genetic question is one that isn't. So let me deal with Neanderthals first. Yes, we did interbreed with Neanderthals. We introgressed with Neanderthals, and so a number of humans on the planet that have ancestry from sort of Asia into Europe do carry a very small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in them. What the effect of that is, as genetics get better, we are seeing some things like hair color and things like that could be carried in some of those recessive traits like that. But we don't know what actual effect that very low level of introgression has had. And then you've of course heard of things like Denisovans, which you get people from Indonesia all the way up into Asia and China carrying Denisovan. Very small traces of Denisovan DNA with it, and that's due to integration too, sex. We had sex with them, but in very low levels and very low interactions from a global human population level. If we introgress with naledi, and I think that's entirely a possibility, it was an extremely low level, probably below that. It's interaction with likely African populations, and you know what the beauty is? We will know. I'll give that away. We will know. This is not a mystery that will remain a mystery for very long. And that's one of the beauties of the timing of a discovery like this. Molecular sciences has improved and exploding, and we come along with the largest assemblage of hominids ever, so you can actually do some destructive sampling. And we have, I will say this to this group, you're not allowed to tell anybody, we have molecular results. Not DNA yet, but we have molecular results, and they are going to blow your mind. Back here, I've been ignoring this side.
Any speculation on your part on what the last common ancestor was between Homo naledi and humans? Where they split? Was it they're in the Homo genus, so I assume it may have been after Australopithecus, but is there any possibility they could have derived from Australopithecus separately?
That is a great question that, because I think I have the answer, I'm not going to answer you. That almost answered it, didn't it? I think we have to be prepared for. I saw someone was wearing the T-shirt model of human evolution. I saw. You were, yeah. There, stand up. Turn around. Turn around. You know that one, the T-shirt model of human evolution, the progression. Oh, show that way. Show that way. Come on, you're a new model. It's Fashion Week. Up you go. That's not true. It's really, really not true. All right. There, right there in the back. Fast hand up. You. Yeah. Oh, let's get a mic there.
I loved your show. I watched
Thank
it
you.
last night, and there was a moment where you became a little emotional, talking about the possibility of the word religion. So I want to know whether you considered these are people who are planning a life afterwards. They're not people. They're animals. They know something about life and death. Is it possible, as near-death experience and all this science is moving to the idea that there is no death, that this is where evolution can go to cross that barrier, that these people understood something about taking a tool to another part of their consciousness, these non-people?
So I don't want to answer that. I don't know. I'm a scientist. This really, I never thought I'd be dragged into these sort of areas, but I have been by fate. And I think it is hard to get away that we are dealing with let me say it this way. I think the evidence is growing that we are dealing with a non-human culture as complex as human culture that existed independently from us in the past. This is as close to our Star Trek moment as we may ever get. That first contact, and what do we do when, and by the way, I have a team I'm assembling that's being led by indigenous leaders and other thinkers from around the world that are going to sit and contemplate what we should do as humans about this space. This place meant a lot to them. If you want to use a word like sacred, I try to avoid that because that's a human term. But it clearly meant a lot to them. They took their loved ones there repeatedly. They altered the space. They used the space in what can only be described as a ritualistic way. It is a cultural space. And I think that we as humans have to pause for a moment and ask ourselves, well, what do we do? You don't treat it like a human, but I know what we do if it were humans, and so we're going to think about that before we allow anyone to destroy or damage or ruin this beautiful, precious space. I know I'm not answering your question, but you can get by how I'm thinking about it, how I'm leading towards the idea of a recognition of that level of cultural complexity. I think let's take two more. How about there and then this guy right here? There. There in the back.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Clearly, you went into the cave having lost the right amount of poundage with a hard hat and all kinds of gear, rigging gear. I'm assuming you guys were roped up to some degree for your ascents in a sense. Is there any evidence of how these people got into it and navigated that space?
So I love, firstly, that everyone's struggling like we do with, what do you call them? People? I don't know, that's not right. So firstly, no, we don't use ropes. We can't, it's too tight. You can't use rigging gear and ropes. And anyway, it's not a real thing because if you want to stop yourself falling, you just inhale. It's not that kind of space. And ropes don't fit, and you just can't do it. It's in the way. It's not a tube. And even though our scientists drew it like that, the geologists, I'm not sure why they did. It's a labyrinth. It's a network of these plates of chert, and the fissures go down between them, and they vary in size. Naledi would have moved through there with relative ease. It wouldn't have been super easy, but relative ease. Their heads are smaller. They're built for that. They're all slight. They have those shoulders. They're climbers. It's us big-headed, barrel-chested humans, which we're just going the way we fit. And I'll just answer this question because probably someone's saying, "Oh, why don't you just widen it?" This is a place of massive dolomitic blocks that fracture along, and then you get these lattice work networks underneath these massive ones. Imagine scaffolding holding up blocks the size of this room. Does anyone want to get under a scaffolding holding up a block of literally millions of tons of rock and start knocking out one just to see if it'll still stay up? We're not going to do that. And so we just picked the people with the right stuff. I think they would have moved there. I don't think the way we go in is the way they go in, but I don't think it's not easy. However they're going in, and here's the lesson that really makes it all not matter. There's only Homo naledi in those back chambers. They're there alone. However this access is, even if there's another access and we don't think there is, it's bad enough that it restricts practically all other cryptic animals. And that means it's tough. And that's probably why they're there. Last question, back this side. Yeah, there.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. Amazing presentation. One of the questions I had was, is there any evidence of how these Homo naledi passed away? As you said earlier, with the face that was found, there was some evidence of potentially an animal getting to that one?
No. There's no evidence of an animal getting to it, yeah.
And sort of going off that, I was wondering, is it possible that these Homo naledi were brought into the chamber, then expired, and were buried after that?
So these are the healthiest dead things we've ever seen. There's no sign of any injuries, nothing. Now, granted, parts of them are fragmentary and stuff, but there's certainly no carnivore damage on any of them. So, however they're getting in there, they're coming in there without evidence of that. I think that, no, I don't think it would be, what we're going to be describing shortly, you'll see in some papers coming out, are many, many, many burials. They're many. We were originally digging in a bunch of burials. We just didn't recognize them because they were overlapping burials that were dug through. And then so there's actual evidence of disruption of previous burials, and then the placing of an articulated body in and then covering it, and then the disruption of that at a later time. And I think that's pretty strong evidence for it's probably, I think the hypothesis, this time it's fairly straightforward. They're taking dead bodies in there and parts of dead bodies, maybe just heads. It is interesting that when a human dies in the African veldt, and, things don't die very pleasantly in Africa, about the only thing left of them is their face, because about the only inedible part. The scavengers go for the brains. They just strip our bodies because our bones are very light relative to antelopes and other things, and they're easy to crunch and that kind of thing. And often it's just the face that's left, and that is an interesting thing where we'll be exploring. There are quite a few kids' faces with nothing else, or that may just be part of what they do. I don't know. That's just part of the fascinating journey that we're going to all share together. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again to the Explorers Club. It is a pleasure to come here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Lee's going to sign some books outside, so if you guys just let Lee head outside, he's going to sign some books. And just as a quick programming note, there is no lecture next week. It's Climate Week, and there are many, many tickets still available for a lot of those programs. So those are 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. All next week is Climate Week. Thanks, everybody.